All right, welcome to Module 6, and I hope you had a look at the overall mind map video to give you some sort of structure onto which we're going to sort of place the knowledge. Now, of course, you've done this before in other modules, and you probably watched the study skills video on the benefits of mind maps. But of course, remember, one of the big benefits is that it gives you a feel of where you're going. It gives you some structure onto which that we can place the new information. And then, of course, as we keep doing the new information, you, on your mind maps at home, keep adding the new information and updating it regularly. And every single time while you do that, you're actually revising the course. And so, therefore, you're constantly keeping in your mind and fighting the forgetting curve. So please make sure that you've got your A3 mind maps, that you're adding content to it, stick it on the wall, do it in pencil, etc. You might have to rub things out, move them around a little bit, and then by the end of the module you have gone back to that mind map so many times, revised the concepts, how does this relate to that, can I move that one there, etc., that you're revising the course constantly, and that's really good for your brain. So let's check out what the syllabus says here. It says investigate the correct IUPAC nomenclature for acids and bases, and also looks at their properties. So we're going to break this syllabus point up first into looking at their basic properties, then we're going to look at the nomenclature and in that sort of order. So let's get into what are the properties of acids. All right, well, one of the main sort of properties of acids is taste. You recognize acids in foods. Not that we taste acids, of course, in the lab, but in foods in everyday life, we taste them all the time. And one of them, of course, is in lemons. That sour taste in lemons. Now, our human tongue has about 10,000 taste buds on it, and each taste bud actually can be broken up into 100 different, or 100 receptors. So that's a lot of possible sites that those taste buds and receptors can be activated. Now, to get that sour taste, we are relying on it being activated by H+ ions, and those H+ ions, of course, come from acids. And so that is pretty cool to realize that. Here I have a common acid that's found in, of course, our citrus fruit, which is citric acid. We're going to be using citric acid in this module, specifically when we start looking at its use as an acid for titration. And so we're going to do this one here. Now, the way that my brain works sometimes is I'm very visual, so you might notice that all the graphics and stuff I use are very colorful, very pictures, mind maps, very visual. And so when I memorize citric acid, I don't tend to memorize the formula, I actually memorize the molecule, and I draw the molecule out and then go for the formula, whichever one works for your brain. So these H+ stimulate the receptors, so that's what our taste involves with acids. Well, pH. pH, you look back in year 9 probably, and you know some basics upon pH, and we're going to add more detail to that. You may remember that good old pH is a scale that measures the percentage of hydrogen ions, and it goes from 0 to 14 typically, and the acid portion of this is from 0 to just below 7, and so that is acidic range. Now you can see that the values for acids have that pH range. The reason is because acids produce H+ ions. Now we're going to learn when acids do produce a H+ ion, it's actually a hydronium ion, because a proton by itself is just way too active for it to be released from the molecule. So it's actually the movement to produce what's known as a hydronium ion, and we'll look at that in more detail later. When they release those H+ ions, they're known as proton donors, right? So write that one down, highlight it, because we're going to come back to that one again and again, and specifically link that to a theory of acid bases. But at the moment, they release H+ ions, they're known as proton donors. And we can see that here we've got some litmus paper testing an acid, and you can see that it's in the acidic range. It's giving us a red color, and that's telling us it has pH 3. Over here we've got a setup, of course, testing very common pH substances such as lemon juice. We have acetic acid here, hydrochloric acid, and you can see all of them are showing a red or yellow pH. So you can see that acetic acid must be a very weak acid because it's only falling into there, whereas we have lemon juice is a little bit lower, down closer to orange, and then we have the hydrochloric acid down in the red. And we're going to talk about that later in terms of how strong acids are. But we can see that no matter how strong the acids are, they all have this characteristic pH value. And we've got some common things here, such as vinegar, which is acetic acid there, we just talked about. We've got some orange juice, well, that's because of the citric acid in there. We have tomatoes, which are very acidic, and of course stomach acid and battery acid. So just some common examples of acids which all fit into a low pH. Now when we talk about pH, here's some new information that we don't know, so make sure you get this down, and we will be revising this and going over it. But we know that it's constructed in terms of H plus ions, and when we have lots of H plus around, we get a low pH. So down here where there's a low pH, we have lots and lots of H plus ions. As we go upwards, we get less pH ions. So low pH means that we have lots of ions. High pH means we have low H plus ions. When we start getting up into the bases, the amount of H plus ions is so small, but the OH minus ions are a lot larger, and so we end up with very basic pH values. Now here's something which we'll come back again to, but write this down and highlight it, because this is actually in the 2023 HSC multiple choice question, but it's come up all the time about pH and what does it mean. Now pH is a logarithmic scale, it's not a linear scale. So with a linear scale, we're just going, okay, 1, 2, 3, they're only just one pH unit apart. That's not the case. In terms of H plus ions, right, the scale represents a logarithmic scale. So that's 10 times the previous value. So if I start from 0, I have 10 times the amount of H plus ions. Then when I go from 1 to 2, I have 10 times more H plus ions. So that means the difference between 0 and 2 is actually 10 times 10, which is 100-fold. If I go to pH 3, that's 10 times more than what I had at pH 2, okay? And so that would be 10 times 10, which is 100, and then I have 10 times 100, which is 1,000 more at pH 3 compared to when I have pH 1. So we have a 10-fold increase, and we can see this with our numbers, right? So down here I've got 1, then we've got 10 times, then we've got 10 times, 10 times, 10 times. You can see that by the power. The power is to the 3, to the 4, to the 5, to the 6, etc. So we're doing a 10-fold increase each time we have a pH value. So make sure that is in your brain cells, and we'll come across that later when we actually measure the pH using a mathematical formula. All right, indicators. Well, acids, we can have characteristic colors for indicators, because indicators tell us the pH environment that the acid is in. And so here you can see here we've got a scientist testing some soil pH, and it's green, and that's telling them that green is pH 7. So they're indicating to the scientists what pH environment that they are testing. When you write this down, make sure that you use some colors now to reinforce this. We've got the blue litmus turns red, and so we can see in my diagram here I've got blue litmus, but when I place it into a solution of hydrochloric acid, it turns red. Okay, so highlight that, or color it in so it reinforces with your eyes, right? So blue turns red in acid. Another indicator is called phenolphthalein. Now phenolphthalein is colorless in acid but pink in base, and so at around about pH 8.2 or so it changes from colorless to pink, and we'll come across that one when we do titrations, but that is another one as well. So there's many types of indicators that change color to indicate the pH environment, and we'll talk more about that in the video on indicators. But that is a quick characteristic of acids. Here is the one I was telling you about before with the phenolphthalein. You can see in the video here that the scientist is doing a titration, and it starts off pink. So we're going from a basic environment, but then when they're adding acid to it, the pH is changing, and at a particular point that will turn colorless at pH 8.3, and then the scientist knows to stop adding the acid, and then they can do calculations to work out an unknown solution or concentration. And so that is using an indicator in a volumetric technique or analytical technique known as titration. And we can see we've got a curve here which we're going to come back to and study a lot more when we do titrations. And so we want to stop it at this straight point of the graph here, right, which is known as the equivalence point. And that equivalence point we're going to give us information, but you can see we can use different indicators here, we can use phenolphthalein, bromothymol blue, or methyl orange, depending upon the chemicals that we're testing. And so there's 3 different indicators that we can use that's going to give us information about the technique. Okay, so that's a pretty cool characteristic of acids. Another characteristic of acids is, of course, their reactions. And one of the classic reactions, of course, is acids and metals. And you can see that here we've got a strip of magnesium, which is an active metal reacting with an acid. And we looked at these way back last year in module 4 and 3. And so that shouldn't be too new to you. But of course, we've got to revise and make it linked into the Year 12 content now. And so that's a pretty cool one. In fact, that is the poster that we produced. I think it was in module 3 or 4. That was the poster that we looked at, and we're going to be looking at those reactions in Year 12 as well, all the different ways in which we can have reactions occurring here, and look at it through the lens of an acid-base system. And so acids react with different active metals to produce our H2 gas, and of course we can use the POP test to do that. Different acids react differently depending upon their strength. Okay, so in this module here, we're looking at acids and bases, and so the strength of the acid will determine how vigorously it will react with metals. And you've experienced that throughout all of your chemistry career from Year 7 to where you are now, that you know if I gave you a very dilute acid, it's going to react very slowly and give you small little bubbles. However, if we had a strong acid, then, or a more concentrated acid, it's going to react faster. We have hydrogen gas, as I said, can be confirmed using the POP test, and we'll revise that as well. Another thing that we have to get into our head is some examples of common acids here. Well, here I have some common acids. We've got inorganic acids and we've got organic acids. Right, so when you add this to your mind map, make sure you're separating these out. Inorganic acids are the ones that you've come across a lot previously, such as hydrochloric acid, sulfuric acid, and carbonic acid. And these can be known sometimes as mineral acids because they have inorganic compounds in there, so chlorine and sulfur. Then we have carbonic acid, right? And then we go into the organic acids. So we have acetic acid, citric acid, propanoic acid, for example. All right, and we'll look at the organic acids in more detail in this module as well. And here is an example of an organic acid. We will learn that we have this characteristic group here known as a carboxyl group, right? Carboxyl group. And that is when it releases a H plus into the environment, and that gives it its acidic properties. Here we have some pictures of our inorganic acid. So we have hydrochloric acid, and then of course we have our sulfuric acid, and we have those structures there. So they're just some examples of common acids. So that's it for this video. We've revised, we've added a little bit more juice to your brain cells there to push them from your Year 11 content into Year 12 now, always trying to add more information. We're revising the previous concepts that we had from Year 11. That way they're coming to the front of your brain, and then we're adding more information. And all of this information, of course, you've got down in your book in great notes, highlighted key terms, adding the details to your mind map. It's all about making it new and making it make sense to your brain. So we did quite a lot in this video. We looked at generically the characteristics of acids. And so here is a poster that I've produced as usual to try and make it as visual as possible, to give you something to hang up in your study or classroom and test your brain cells frequently. In fact, what I say to my students is not only can you make your flip book at home with your study cards, you can do the same with these posters if you want. You can print them in A4 and you can put them in your flip book. So you can have like a book that at the front is the posters and at the back is the study cards. Okay, so you just carry that book around with you and you've got it all there ready to go, and you can have tabs on the sides for the major areas, so you can just quickly flip to it with a friend or with yourself and just test yourself and see if you can remember it. So we've covered lots of things. We haven't done this here. I had to get rid of that from a previous video, so ignore that. Okay, but we have actively recalled the major content that we looked at today. We looked at taste. From taste, we then looked at the other characteristic down here. We can see pH. We did our pH scale. We talked about acids and their pH characteristics. We then looked at indicators and different forms of indicators. So we looked at We looked at just litmus paper. We didn't talk about universal indicator, but that's another one you could use. And we talked about the phenolphthalein. Okay, and then we had a look at the types of acids, and then we finished with reactions. So that's it with this video. As usual, always have a go at the questions below, worksheets that are going to be attached there, and of course, keep studying frequently, and I'll see you in the next video.